Leaders be crazy, am I right? Maybe, or maybe not. The world is complicated after all. Perhaps we will sort out some answers on today's edition of the Geopolitics HelpLINE. This question comes from a long-time listener, first-time caller named Ryan, I believe from Northern Ireland. How would you use this
magical mathematical formula of yours to calculate irrational behavior among state actors or terrorism? I'm thinking Putin, Iran, the Houthis, who don't seem to be acting rationally to me. I don't understand how someone like you can model that.
Whoa, what happened to my voice there? That was weird. Anyway, I guess that we are finally doing this one. In short, there is scant evidence that Putin and pals are irrational in the way that mathematical social scientists conceive of the word. In colloquial language, irrational he may be, but there is a reason why we define irrationality in social science a particular way. It is remarkably easy to analyze colloquially irrational behavior. It requires more effort to analyze social science irrational behavior, but it is feasible enough. As a starting point, much of this irrationality conversation is a bunch of people talking past each other. There are at least 6 different things people actually mean when they describe someone as irrational, especially as it relates to warfare. Intransitive preference irrationality, astrategic irrationality, ideological irrationality, geopolitical irrationality, sunk cost fallacy irrationality, miscalculation irrationality, and information bubble irrationality. Oh, I guess that was 7, not 6. Yikes, maybe I'm irrational. Anyway, the first 2 of those are social science irrationality, the middle 2 are colloquial uses of the word, and I would best describe the last 3 as misclassified. So what I want to do today is go through the meaning of each of these, and then comment on the applicability of them and how they complicate, or do not complicate, trying to model our world at war. To keep this from turning into a marathon video, I will mostly focus on Putin, with assorted comments where appropriate about others. Okay, first up is the strictest form of social science irrationality, intransitive preferences. And I think this one will be quick because I do not think that there is a good case for it. Transitive preferences mean that if I prefer A to B and I prefer B to C, then I also prefer A to C. For example, imagine I like Why Ukraine Survived more than I like formal models of crisis bargaining. I like formal models of crisis bargaining more than I like militant competition. For me to have rational preferences, I must like Why Ukraine Survived more than I like militant competition. Equivalently, I have intransitive preferences if I somehow instead like militant competition more than Why Ukraine Survived. It does not make much sense if I prefer A to B and B to C, but somehow I also prefer C to A. Those are intransitive preferences. Basically, the strictest form of rationality is just ensuring that people do not have weird preference cycles, which prevents them from naming a favorite outcome among a set of alternatives. Note that irrationality is defined over outcomes, not strategies that lead to outcomes. So if there were some weird rock-paper-scissors subgame in the Ukraine war, it is perfectly fine for Putin to cycle over those strategies, because the underlying outcome that he cares about, winning relative to the cost of fighting, does not cycle. I have yet to see a compelling argument for when leaders have intransitive preferences like this. In fact, the best support you might be able to find are lab experiments, where the subjects have to choose between effectively inconsequential choices that they have little incentive to spend effort thinking about. That is basically the opposite situation as a war, where the stakes cannot be higher. Moving on, the other form of social science irrationality is strategic irrationality, which is the inability to correctly process the information in front of you and craft a plan given the constraints of your environment. In theory, there are an unlimited number of different ways that this could manifest itself. The easiest one to understand is if you have a leader that is drunk. He reaches a decision node and he has to make a choice. It is straightforward enough to make the correct decision if you are sober, but he is not, and so he behaves as if randomly. I want to immediately jump in here to note that Putin has a reputation for sobriety. So much so that when he was holding a glass of champagne, swaying back and forth and slurring his words in a December 2022 appearance. There was a brief "Putin is done" period, with his alleged turn to alcoholism as the proof. Fun reminder that one isolated incident should not be taken as evidence of a trend. Then again, wouldn't it be funny if some of the others that the viewer mentioned were actually closet alcoholics? Now, I do not want to suggest that leaders are universally perfect in their thought processes, but I struggle to pinpoint what sort of systematic errors these leaders make given the preferences that they have. Hold further thoughts about those preferences for a minute. Usually, the evidence people will cite to this effect is, people are irrational, leaders are people, therefore they are irrational. Well, that is a vague criticism. And if by people are irrational, they mean there are academic papers demonstrating various ways that people are irrational, then sure, yes, those papers exist. But to rehash a point from just a couple of minutes ago, there is a major difference between people exhibiting irrational behavior in low-stakes affairs, where there's a cost associated with thinking through what the best strategy is, and people making mistakes in high-stakes affairs. When I was growing up, for example, my parents were not always gainfully employed. To this day, I still look at the dessert menu at a restaurant and have to fight my first urge to just put it down because I cannot afford something extra, even though I am at a point in my life that, yes, a little dessert is not about to bankrupt me. But when it comes to major life decisions, like whether I move to another city or decide to change jobs, I think that I am much better at catching myself having silly thoughts because it matters so much whether I get it right. Again, decisions whether to go to war are as high stakes as they get, and these decisions are being made by people who have spent careers having to make high-stakes decision after high-stakes decision to get where they are. Consequently, there ought to be a strong null hypothesis that they are pretty darn good with their decision-making. 2 more points. 1. Modeling irrationality is not that hard. You simply need to be explicit in what that irrationality is and how it affects decision-making. Then you can plop it down in the same models that we normally look at and examine how others respond to the presence of that irrationality. Put differently, models of human behavior are just that, models. They create rules, and they examine what happens when those rules interact with one another. For the reasons that I just described, the standard rule is rational behavior. But it is simple enough to replace one rule with another. In fact, about 18 months ago, I discussed that exact point when you have someone who just wants to escalate regardless of the incentives at play. The second point is that I'm open to hearing more about well-defined types of irrationality that we could discuss in a future video. But how many times have you seen a comment about Putin that is more or less, LOL, he's irrational? There is no conversation to be had there, and it feeds into a tendency of keyboard warriors to take the easy way out, because real analysis is hard. Hold that thought for a minute. Moving outside of the social sciences, next up is ideological irrationality. This is having a set of beliefs that are not sensible in the eyes of the accuser. I think that this is the most common way that people conceive of the word when discussing various leaders, from Putin to an Ayatollah. And the thing is, it is a complete non-issue on my end. Think about what we care about when working through crisis bargaining incentives: an expected outcome of a war, and the costs associated with fighting. Notice what is not there, why a state wants something, and why they are willing to pay the corresponding costs to obtain it. Those things are just taken as a given, and we go from there. In other words, I do not need to know or care about why Putin wants to annex parts of Ukraine to understand the fundamental bargaining incentives that fall out from there. I also do not need to know why Iran wants to establish a dominion in the broader Middle East, nor do I need to care why Trump just wants to be the center of attention 24/7, 365. Of course, knowing those things can provide some additional commentary on how to interpret the events that we watch, so we might want to care about those things for a different reason. But we do not really need that information for the broad majority of what we cover on this channel. Actually, earlier in the video, I called an audible and put militant competition in the preference cycle, when my script originally called for what caused the Russia-Ukraine war. And I did that because that book is a series of models that analyze militant behavior, including the T word that I will not repeat. If we have models that can cover people as crazy as those, I think we can handle a little bit of Putin in our lives. During my formative years as a researcher, one of the biggest eye-openers for me was this book. Basically, it explains how Nazi Germany negotiated with the various countries that it tried to consume. The more that they collaborated, the less that their Jewish citizens were victimized in the Holocaust. If the all-time leader in ideological evil was negotiating, what more is there to say about the rest of us? Also, I should note that Ethan was my first mentor and is a regular viewer of this channel. Everyone say hi to him in the comments. That said, I do find a lot of the framing around that conversation to be a waste of time. Yes, from the perspective of a vast majority of Westerners, Putin is doing evil things, and someone with an ideologically sober mindset would never do what he is currently doing. But rehashing that conversation does not get us any closer to ending the war. His preferences are not going to change, and the real strategic questions are about what to do in response. Fourth on this list, we have geopolitical irrationality. This is taking actions that run contrary to a set of goals that certain analysts believe that states should share. I will be blunt. I hate this one. It tends to come from ivory tower institutions and others in the prime think tanks in Washington. Look, what a leader wants to do with his resources is up to him. He does not need to subscribe to your own set of geopolitical strategic standards because you tell him he should. If he really, really wants to send hundreds of thousands of men to their deaths to acquire some Azov coastline, that may just be what he wants to do. He is not irrational because he is mortgaging the future power of the state. He does not care about that. He cares about the thing to be acquired. And for both this type of irrationality and the last type, what we are really saying is that the leader cares a lot about what is at stake. And that manifests itself in crisis bargaining by the leader internalizing the costs of war at a very low rate. You will notice that this grants leaders more bargaining power, which in turn creates another problem. Much of the evidence cited for leaders acting crazy like this is that they say that they care so much about fighting over issues that normal people do not think are worthwhile. Well, time to tap the sign. 5. We have miscalculation irrationality. This is making mistakes when confronting situations rife with uncertainty. As a general comment about the next 3 categories, all of them fall for the same trap. Something weird happens in the world. People see it. Then, rather than think about how those weird things can happen given the right strategic circumstances, the lazy analyst says that they are irrational and calls it a day. This is just bad analysis, especially in an environment where there is a strong incentive to craft a good game plan. Perhaps the biggest eye-opener for me in this regard was the book Games Prisoners Play. From the outside, prison looks utterly bizarre. But that is because most of us have never been in one, and we do not understand the incentives that prisoners face. Well, the author of this book was a publisher for Solidarity during the Cold War. Polish police found him in possession of illegal books and arrested him. Suddenly, he found himself learning all of the fun of Polish prison subculture. Oh, and then he got a PhD in political science, learned that game theory was a great framework to understand the apparent absurdity of prison life, wrote that book, and is now a professor at UC Irvine. He also gets to credibly describe himself as a revolutionist on his CV, which is something that few of us get to do. Anyway, back to miscalculation uncertainty. Putin thought that he could do better by fighting. He was wrong. LOL. He is irrational. This is just such a bad take. No doubt Putin would have avoided pursuing the manner of the war that he did had he known what was happening. But he did not know. And so in the presence of that uncertainty, he spun the wheel and made a rational gamble. Oops. But who among us has not shown up for work late because there was a traffic accident that we did not expect? It's the same thing. And we do not even have the excuse that other intelligence agencies are intentionally trying to make our informational environments as bad as possible. 6th is information bubble irrationality. This is having your information be woefully inaccurate due to incentive structures that you have intentionally created. Again, this is not a good use of the word irrational. Putin did not create an incentive structure that would fail to give him good advice on the eve of the war for fun. He did it because he wanted to stay in power, and sometimes the institutions that autocrats create come with real trade-offs. This is one of them. In fact, Putin was well aware that there were problems with corruption in the military, and tried to implement reforms to fix them. But implementing reforms is easier said than done when you are also trying to keep a firm grip over the government. Much better to think about this as a puzzle to be understood than to just say that it was dumb to set up those institutions and move on. Finally, we arrive at sunk cost fallacy irrationality. This is pretty close to astrategic irrationality, though perhaps not quite. It is easy enough to conjure preferences that work for it mathematically, but they do not seem sensible. I have 2 comments in response here. 1. To recur one of my favorite points, keyboard warriors often fall victim to what I call the sunk cost fallacy, which is the idea that sinking costs cannot change the attractiveness of various strategies. This is wrong. I may have wildly miscalculated the cost of a war, to the point where I would retrospectively want to go back and never have started it. Nonetheless, my continuation of the war does not immediately drop me into a world of the sunk cost fallacy. What matters is my expected costs for continuation versus withdrawing. And conditional on already having lost a bunch of soldiers, it might actually be better for me to lose a few more to obtain the grand prize at the end. Ironically, not continuing under these conditions would be falling for the sunk cost fallacy. And comment 2, like the last couple of types of irrationality, observing what appears to be a sunk cost fallacy in action is better suited as a puzzle worth explaining. And usually the answer there is that the leader feels obligated to continue the effort to gamble for resurrection. If the war ends as it currently stands, the leader is likely to lose office. If he continues, there is some chance that things will turn around and his career will be saved. I have noted many times before that I am skeptical of this argument as it relates to Putin, but it is still worth noting here. Just as a closing thought here, actual analysis of geopolitics is difficult, and we ought to resist the temptation to take intellectual shortcuts. Am I inclined to believe that actual irrational behaviors have guided foreign policies at times? Yes. Is it the first thought that you or I should have when seeing something bizarre out there in the wild? No. Yikes. I think that this is the longest Geopolitics HelpLINE video I have ever created. Remember how I started this series intending for them to be shorter videos to help me reduce my workload? Whoops, I guess I am irrational. Thanks to Ryan for providing that great question. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.